for coming today to our meeting. This is our fifth and final meeting of the Budget Review Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Protection, Tourism, and Energy. And at this time, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Representative All,
Here.
Representative Bray, Representative Gentry, Representative Hart,
Here.
Representative Lockett,
Here.
Representative Petrie, Representative Reed, Representative Weber, and Chair Fugit.
Here. All right. We do not have a quorum to Representative Bray. That gives us a quorum, right? At this time, I need a motion to approve the minutes. We got a motion and a second on the minutes
Motion
from Representative Hart, Representative Lockett. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, minutes are approved, and if you got to go to another meeting, that'll be, I understand. And everybody leaves. Thank you, Brother Mark. All right. And, all right, this time today we'll have representatives from the Economic Development Cabinet, and they will be presenting about Kentucky product development initiatives and mega sites. And if you all would come up to the table at this time, and we appreciate you being here today, Secretary Noel. Appreciate you being here today and presenting to us. She was here, I guess, last week also, and we appreciate. Then we have Beth Land by way of Zoom. All right, it's good to have you all. If you'd raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please introduce yourself and proceed with the presentation.
CEO of the Kentucky Association for Economic Development.
And everybody make sure the green light's on and so we can get you recorded. Thank you.
And my name is Jeff Nolan. I'm with the Cabinet for Economic Development.
I'm Katie Smith. I'm the Deputy Secretary at the Cabinet.
And I'm Beth Land, piping in virtually. I'm excited to chat with y'all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. All right, you may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for allowing us to be here today. And it goes without saying, we also greatly appreciate the role that all of you have played and the support that's come from the legislature with regards to the KPDI program. I think it's not only extremely significant in terms of the dollar support and what it can mean to our state, but what we're learning and what we're discovering is from the very beginning when we did the pilot projects to where we are now, this is a process. And it's very intentional in terms of not just allocating money. What we're trying to do is make sure that every community that participates learns from the process, gets stronger, gets better. And we're seeing that. And we've seen that from the very beginning to where we are now. So we appreciate your support. And with your permission, what I'd like to do is kick off and have a few comments. Then we would ask Haley, who represents one of our important partners with the Kentucky Association of Economic Developers, the true professional trade association for all economic developers, to talk about the project. And then also we do have Beth Land, who is with the outside consultant, and she works for an organization which Haley will talk about. But you know what she does and what her firm does is work with companies and communities in terms of recommending sites, looking at sites, and they bring tremendous expertise, and they've been a wonderful partner from the very beginning. So that's our game plan for today. Yes, and as you know, we always start out with the purpose of the Cabinet for Economic Development, and I do think it's important to know everything we do is about helping make life better for all residents in Kentucky. And I think this is a perfect example of working through the structure, working through the process with local government and with economic developers. We are doing that and even more. These always come back to the fact we've had a great 2-year run. And yet when you look at the number of jobs being announced and the wages that are out there, and candidly, with the recent announcement that unemployment rates are low, it's important to keep in mind a lot of the projects that have been announced are in the pipeline and are still coming in. And some of those sites that we used to be able to recommend to other companies, and that includes existing companies in the state of Kentucky, are not as many. So as a result, this project and this program is important to refresh and add sites into our portfolio. Our one-pager is important to always look at, but if you would look under the operational priorities, we talk about polishing our toolkit and making sure that we've got an ability to polish and drive home Kentucky's brand globally. And sites are a great way of doing that. And if you look on the next slide, one of the strategic imperatives is not only in terms of understanding supplier needs, because there's a lot of companies in Kentucky we think could be expanding. We want to make sure if they need a site, we have those sites. We also think it's important to really encourage companies to grow from within, which was one of the reasons we announced earlier this week the Connects program and the Supply Kentucky initiative, in which we've got tools now to really encourage companies to go online, share what products they make, what services they provide. And now when we work with companies that are looking to locate here, we can also say to them, one of the requirements of our support is you look first to try to grow from within. So that's one of our strategic imperatives, but also it's to use the PDI program to help support our existing businesses and be able to attract new ones. And so I come back to that because for me, having a very defined strategy with clear outcomes and articulating them and then linking them into major legislative initiatives like this one, to us is just very important in terms of how we go about our business. You've seen this slide, but it's my favorite slide because the majority of the work the Cabinet does is to support our core existing companies in the state and to then understand what their needs are as they grow and extend beyond the core or go even, if you will, far beyond the core. We are trying to make sure we have the tools and support to help them be able to grow. And quite candidly, if you go to the next slide, there was an article written for Jones Lang LaSalle by one of their internal team members that's talking about existing companies, the growth in automotive, the growth in machinery and others that are driving this demand for space that we know is happening out there in the country. And with that demand for space comes even more demand for shovel-ready, good sites for companies to take a look at. So the timing of this is obviously really, I think, beneficial. And an article from Automotive News from, I believe it was September or August of last year, highlighted how automotive companies are changing their strategies and how important the relationship from a regional perspective happens to be in terms of where they're locating to either expand or grow. Great rural areas make great locations for automotive sites, but also that interdependencies with urban areas and colleges and airports and things are becoming more important than ever as a result of the changing in the workforce, changing in the dynamics that are out there. And I think that goes to a lot of the things you're going to see in the PDI rollout in terms of helping understand not just where the dirt is going and which community, but what are you selling in terms of what a company's looking for that goes beyond the county or city boundaries and more into that ecosystem that they're going to need to be a part of if they locate in that respective area. Speed of decision making is clearly one of the more important things. And having mistakenly spent some time in Michigan, which I made a slip up here just a moment ago, glad to be back home in Kentucky. But having done enough work in other states on behalf of Whirlpool, I know that every state and every community, whenever you go visit with them, likes to say, we got great sites, blah, 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 this site is ready to go. The reality is there's a real big difference between having a piece of dirt or a piece of ground that you say is a great site and having all the information that you need to really show that it can be an immediate site that you can immediately build upon, and more importantly, that you have all the data and all the information that removes uncertainty. Because companies today and site consultants that I'm sure Beth would allude to, when they have a lot of sites to look at, they're finding reasons to take them off of their list. And oftentimes not having that information or not having everything that's going to take to build out the site, or if there's a wetland area, what it takes to remediate that uncertainty is a lot of reasons why communities then get cut from that short list before they ever get into what I call active consideration. And from our perspective, information is the best way of removing uncertainty from the equation. And if we remove uncertainty from the equation, we have a much better chance for all communities to be considered and to be given the opportunity to grow and to create the kind of jobs that they are looking for. Now, this is a little bit of my perspective and the Cabinet's perspective. It's not officially SSG's, but I would say that it's pretty close to what is a true definition for a shovel-ready site. And it goes back to a lot of communities say they have it, but in some cases, communities don't have control over the land. And there's all these steps that they would have to go through. In some cases, communities and industrial authorities don't even have a clear title that can be presented on that particular site. And there's a whole list of things that I think are important to really make it a shovel-ready site. But the last two bullets, items 6 and 7, I think go really to the heart of it. and I've heard this from companies many, many times, and that is they're looking for a site in a community that's got a known reputation just to get things done, because uncertainty, you try to take it out of the equation, but things will come up. And you want to be in a community that just knows how to deal with those things and just get them resolved. And also, I think communities need to have a very realistic understanding of their strengths, but also any weaknesses they have, because they bring those weaknesses up and they say, and here's how we're dealing with it. Companies are very smart. They know that no community is perfect, no company is perfect. So understanding that communities have a good reality-based understanding of themselves is an important element of being able to attract and bring in opportunities for those areas. And we think that that's part of our mission, is, again, being super collaborators and working with all of the communities alone. Success for us is just not looking at one thing or the other, but really having a holistic approach when you present a product. And for us, we want to, again, thank you, because this is a major solution, because not every community knows that. And in some cases, not every community has the experience to know that they need this information or that information. And this process has really helped go through as if a company was looking at that site, that then allows us to score out to determine whether it should move forward into that process. And so this approach, I think, is not only very, very good, but I again want to compliment the governor and the legislature, because it's not just the dollar impact. I would argue it's a 10x benefit in terms of the understanding, the knowledge, and the way that we're working with communities to strengthen themselves and to become better at presenting what it is they are presenting to prospective companies looking for a place to either locate or expand. And finally, I think the understanding of why now. I think I went through these the last time I was here, so I won't go through them again, other than to say the world's changing, and the whole reshoring process is real. And I think this program is a great tool to help the state continue to advance, to continue to be in that spirit of winning with integrity. And it's just going to be a great opportunity for us to ride the crest of wave of change, to be out front of it with regards to the benefits and things that are happening as a result. So that's kind of an introduction into the program. And I'd ask Haley to kind of walk us through some of the process steps and why this partnership has been so good for the entire state.
Yes, well, thank you. My comments will be brief, but it has been such an exciting collaboration when we look at the way that this statewide program came from legislation created by the General Assembly with a state agency executing alongside a statewide association of economic developers. I mean, this is a wonderful approach to helping serve the entire Commonwealth, and it's been wonderful to watch and to hear communities' feedback on this process. It's a holistic approach, the statewide Kentucky Product Development Initiative program, that really has built in a way to, I think, advance equity in all communities, so that no matter the size or the scale of industry within a given community in Kentucky, these projects are measured based on how they're going to generate return on investment. That's really what we're doing, is looking at these state appropriations and making sure that that money is well spent, well invested for the good of the local community as well as the overall state economy. As the Secretary mentioned, this is a process, and this process of leading communities through these applications, through developing these projects, really prepares them for the opportunities that will surely come from these investments. We've utilized a nationally known consulting firm, which we'll get to in a minute, but that aspect is really critical to this success. When we look at weighing projects, looking at return on investment, we want to make sure we're not just looking at it from our local perspectives or our statewide perspective, but that a national consulting firm has weighed in and said, this is what companies globally are looking for, and this is what will make you successful. So defining what's eligible, what the project is going to cover, has been really important to make sure that, again, we're making this as fair and accessible as possible to everyone in the Commonwealth. We've defined the economic development projects that can be awarded funds or can apply for site and infrastructure improvements to serve things like manufacturing, agribusiness, headquarters, hospitals. The list goes on. You have that in your packet. But eligible grant recipients are local governments or economic development authorities. It's very important that this is publicly owned property, so that it's, again, goes back to the good of the entire community. And then the eligible uses here are due diligence, property acquisition, infrastructure extension, site preparation work, building and construction, and road improvements. Now, in House Bill 745 last year, the General Assembly appropriated $100 million to this project, which was exciting. And it's been wonderful to have that available to award to communities. And it's not complete yet, but we're in that process. So it was designed to be awarded over 2 rounds, as you know. So the first round was a maximum funding amount of $2 million, or there was a metric based on population, and that's not listed in this slide, but there's a fact sheet on the Cabinet's website that shows how communities were given their funding amounts based on population. But it was a competitive process, and we tried to communicate this to communities as effectively as we could, that you're not competing against each other in this first round, but that this is you competing against this metric. What we want to make sure we understand is that communities engaging in economic development, it's not a county against another county. This is you against your assets. How can you build up the best resources for the best possible investment for your community? And so that was a really important point we wanted to make sure that people understood and continue to understand. In this second round that's coming up, the same procedure, the same process will apply, but the maximum funding amount would be $2 million for all communities with the money that's left over from round 1. So in order to make this as successful as it could be, KAED was responsible for soliciting RFPs from national site consultants. And I think there were 16 applicants at that time, and 8 were interviewed, and Site Selection Group was selected to represent us in this program. And we have been very grateful for their diligence. And not only have they worked hard and applied this scoring rubric to the program, but they have really looked for how can we give the best advice to these communities? How can we give feedback that actually, if a community does not progress, how can we make sure that we support them in preparing for future rounds or future projects as they invest in their own communities? But I'm going to turn it over now to Beth Land.
Before we even do that, I'm just going to tell you a story, Mr. Chairman. Local economic developer that we spoke to, questions about their application, may or may not make it through the due diligence phase. This particular economic developer said, "Great, I'm glad to know that we're going to have a chance to talk with Beth," naming out Beth, and the SSG teams, because he said, point blank, "I have learned more, and this has done more for us to strengthen how we go about doing our work. And I want to make sure that we are all on the same page, and I'm looking forward to learning more from Beth directly to help us as we think about another application or applying in the second round." And that kind of relationship, and I think that kind of respect that the economic developers across the state have for this process, and for Beth and the team, and for basically the collaborative approach, speaks volumes as to the original intent and the intent that you all laid out, which is, let's just don't go out and hand out money. Let's really build the capacity, and let's really make Kentucky as a state and communities specifically far more competitive than we have been. And I know we're on that track to get that done.
And since we're interjecting, I'm going to interject one more thing, Beth, before I turn it over, if that's okay. We are looking at, and you'll see here in a minute, we noticed that there are certain pockets of the state that haven't had as much activity, as many applications, but SSG, KAED, the Cabinet are all committed to working with those communities to make sure that they have the technical assistance that they need to apply in round 2. We're already planning trainings in communities to do that, and Site Selection Group is fully aware of that and has been working with communities to answer questions, and that's just something that we want you to know we take very seriously, and we're excited about the opportunities that are coming in this second round.
All right, thank you. Ms. Land, you can continue, please.
Awesome. I'm excited to be with y'all. I am extremely passionate about this program. It's really exciting to see the progress that Kentucky has made over the last 4 years, and excited to kind of share that perspective of this particular round, which is super exciting. If you don't mind, go back one slide just for a second. I just want to make sure that people are aware of Site Selection Group. We're based in Dallas. I'm out of Greenville, South Carolina. We work projects across the lower 48, also in Mexico, some in Canada. We help companies choose where to locate. That's our primary bread and butter, is helping companies figure out logistically, from a workforce perspective, from a site and infrastructure perspective, where they should be in the lower 48 for the most part. So I just wanted to make sure that people are aware that that's our primary bread and butter. That's what I'd spend the majority of my time doing. And then from time to time, we'll get engaged by folks like KED or states, utilities to lend that third-party perspective on product development based on our experience working with corporate clients. So I just want to set the stage there that everything I'm doing and talking about is through this corporate lens, making sure that Kentucky is ready to answer the questions for whenever a project comes to town. Okay, great. Let's hit the next slide. So with that in mind, several years ago, whenever we designed this program, we designed evaluation criteria and scoring criteria that mock corporate site selection projects. And that can be office, manufacturing, a lot of different types of projects. But, obviously a big piece for Kentucky is manufacturing and corporate recruitment. So we've designed evaluation criteria based on property availability, looking at things like developability, wetlands, topography, FEMA flood zones, zoning, transportation and utility infrastructure, and then also designing a scoring criteria that reflects, I think the best way to put it is projects that are going to succeed in Kentucky, that Kentucky will be well suited for, and that raise the bar across the state. All right, next slide. This next slide, you're probably thinking, my goodness, what a boring slide. Well, this is where the magic happens. We were very excited to design a program, and this scoring methodology that we use to say whether or not a project is well suited for the KPDI program, again, is based on corporate site selection criteria. And it mocks that typical site selection exercise, but it also tracks exactly what the legislation and what was intended for the program. I'm gonna turn all of these words into a simple analogy. You'll see three main buckets: the total impact and ROI. If you look at the kind of bottom right side of that screen, projects that have the biggest overall impact on the Commonwealth. These are large, high impact, high quality jobs that Kentucky wants to see throughout the state. These typically score better in more populated areas, but we've created a scoring methodology that really helps calibrate, where projects are going to do well, really large projects. The relative impacts also takes into account that Kentucky is a broad state with the different types of operating environments. The relative impact is where some projects may score better in smaller markets where projects might be more cost sensitive or might not have as large of a labor requirement. One job in rural Kentucky might be totally different from one new job in urban Kentucky. We want to find communities that are going to score really well for that relative impact. And then finally, there's a third component, communities that are just absolutely knocking it out of the park. They're an anomaly in the data. They've got an economic development team or judge executives who are hoofing it, doing all the right things. So in my mind, I kind of see this as like, we want apples. We want number one, we want the really big projects in Kentucky. Number two is we want oranges. We want apples and oranges. We want smaller projects that are Kentucky's bread and butter. Y'all supported smaller manufacturing for a very long time, and these projects do score very well in Kentucky. And then the third is just for those communities that are putting in the legwork and putting together options that work really well. I'm happy to get into the nuances of the data and how this is done, but I think in the interest of time, we'll keep moving and you can kind of come back and ask questions at the end. So this is just an overall process. And again, really this mimics a corporate site selection project. We gather our LOIs, we get an application, SSG does a desktop review. And just like with a corporate project, we decide which ones we're going to go visit. In past years, there's been a $3 million limit on funding availability, but since there's such a larger amount of funds available, SSG sat down one day, realized the impact that $100 million has on funding for a program like this. And we said, we've got to go see every single one of these sites and communities if we're going to be able to recommend funding. So SSG got on the road, visited, I can't even remember how many, but you'll see a map in a little bit. We visited, 60, 70, 80 sites over the course of a week, sending 3 separate teams. So it was very extensive effort. Did a detailed evaluation. We made project recommendations. These are given to the cabinet. They are using their the tools that we provide, but then also their context for projects that are going to score and do well in Kentucky. And lastly, that yellow bucket, this applicant feedback. This is why I get so excited. And man, does it speak to me that somebody's excited to talk to me about this, because this is the crux, I think, of this program. there's a huge amount of money on the table, and Kentucky's done a great job of actually putting their money where their mouth is and putting money into product. But we want to kind of leverage this program for much more than the grant dollars. Every single community has the opportunity to chat with us to understand what's the strength of their site, what's the weakness, what's the strength of their workforce, what's their weakness. How can they take all of these pieces of the puzzle and spin it into a narrative so that they're getting more swings at the plate? The way they are answering RFIs, the data that they are putting into the cells that they submit to companies, consultants, and the like are having a major impact on whether or not they're getting site visits. So my passion is to help people get as far as they can to provide the best response possible. And it is phenomenal, the level of improvement on the RFIs and on the site visits over the course of the last 4 years. This program's done a lot more than put money into sites. This program has essentially trained your economic developers and judge executives on how to be successful. So we're super excited about that. Next slide. So I want to just kind of caveat this one. Very excited on a few things. One, the geographic representation, on the potential funding that's available. This is not a final recommendation list, but this is pretty representative. There will be some nuances in some of these that are recommended and not recommended, but this is a geographic representation of the projects that were submitted across the state that we went and visited. And kind of how they fall into some major buckets. There's also, I think, 9 regional projects across the state. So happy to answer questions on this. And for my cohorts in the room, if there's anything else y'all want me to hit on this slide, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I think that's the end of my piece. I'll kick it back over to y'all.
Beth, thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman and others, we are very protective of information about which communities have been recommended, which have not, which communities scored what and where not, because it's a process. And we're happy to talk about that today, but I want to kind of emphasize the reason why we're very protective. It's been a pleasure for me to meet so many of the elected officials in the communities and their economic developer, really great people. And there may be a reason why in some of the process steps they weren't able to get access to the information. Maybe it didn't exist. But by them not being able to progress as well, perhaps as other communities, is not a reflection of how good that community is or is not. It's just a matter of process. And what we don't want is a slide or a bunch of information suddenly that some parts of the state or some parts of the community didn't score as well, and it gets into the wrong hands or it gets in even to site consultants' hands, because they're going to ask the question. Because my honest answer is, in a process, you actually are getting stronger and getting better and getting that information every time you go through it. And my hope is, with the round 2 and with the very aggressive way in which we're working with all communities, we're actually going to see multiple communities get funded, and with it all on the same equal footing relative to their strengths and abilities to be competitive. And so I want to just explain some rationale behind that and the way we've gone about putting that kind of information out there. Now, I also will tell you that in addition to SSG going to the communities, we had our project managers divide up and go with them to those communities. We also have project managers and our compliance people already working with all the communities that applied. It is truly a process in which there's just a lot of give and take and a lot of good information going back and forth. And to kind of explain it further, by design, and actually it was in the statute, which I thought was brilliant in terms of how it was written. The process was where the third-party consultant working in conjunction with the State Professional Economic Developer Association and the cabinet would go out and score these projects and work with communities as if they were doing something for a particular company. And I know from having been on the receiving but also on the end in which companies ask for RFIs, it is not uncommon for a company to say to a community, here's about 60, 70 questions, and we need all the information, and we need it back in 4 days or 3 days. And it needs to be digital, and it needs to be annotated in terms of where did the information come from. That's the way it works. That's what SSG does for companies. And we replicated a bit of that process, perhaps not with as much of the time frame element, but with the kind of information they needed to be able to provide. And so where we were and where the recommendation process came is we had some projects, applications that were high opportunities based on all the criteria. And I want to emphasize again, because we heard it in here last week, Mr. Chairman, we really do look at the uniqueness of each community, and we're not trying to create a one-size-fits-all. because I really think a 10-acre site in certain parts of the state are as impactful as a 500-acre site in other parts of the state. So all this was weighted into the unique elements in terms of what those communities were. And so we had 30 projects that were clear high opportunities. We had 24 that had great potential. And there's some areas that can be improved upon and strengthened, which is what we're working with them on now. And there were some others that clearly have not only great potential, but it's just really a matter of getting it all together and getting all the right information so that holistically you can have the great product that goes along with the piece of the dirt that as I like to say. There were some that were not recommended, many of which were because of compliance issues. Not naming a community, but as an example, one particular, as an example, used the KPDI funds to put in an access road on a private developer's piece of ground with no criteria as to how that ground would be used, what kind of projects will come in place. So there's certain eligibility criteria that we are finding that we're actually going to work with those communities. We already are. We're already communicating with them. And there were two projects that have already received a portion of the $100 million discretionary fund under the purview of the governor because they had a real project, $10 million worth of infrastructure. And so from the time in which they made the application until we did the final scoring, a real project came forward and a real need in terms of speed to decision making came, and we used those discretionary funds. So therefore, they will not then be part of this round of the KPDI program on a go-forward basis. I think Beth did a great job laying out the process. And we are now very much in what I call the due diligence phase. And the due diligence is as important as any transaction, and many of you on this panel understand that. It gets down to the nitty-gritty in terms of the contracts, nitty-gritty in terms of the land itself, all of the work. It gets down to validating the source of funds, doing a little work on validating and how they would be used. So there may or may not be some programs or projects that were presented that we've moved into the due diligence phase that may or may not be finally funded. And of course, in that due diligence phase includes coming before the legislative bodies for some reviews in terms of how to use those funds. So I think the process is really good. And if you can kind of visualize it, what I like about this is we're overlapping round one and round two, and there's going to be a lot of great overlap in terms of the communications to the communities that we're not moving forward on due diligence, but we're already beginning today and in the last 2 weeks working on their next application for round two. And so it's very much an iterative but an ongoing process in terms of where we are and where we're going both for 1 and 2. So what we are believing we're going to wind up with is a $100 million appropriation, thanks again to the legislature, and we believe we'll have approximately $34 million for funding in round one, which means we're looking forward to go forward in round two, and we're shortening the timeline and encouraging communities to have those applications due sometime in June of this year so that we can really accelerate the process and help communities fix if they need to or change or strengthen their previous application so they can really then begin work on what they need to do to have that site fully ready. So again, sometime in June of 23, we'll be having those awards and deadlines. And we've got webinars already set up. We've got teams communicating with all of the communities. And again, work is now already being done for moving the ones that were asked to go forward in due diligence, those that perhaps had a compliance issue or a regulatory issue that's being corrected to help them get into the queue for then the next phase. And we've also discovered, and I'm quoting another economic developer, they may have found an alternative based upon some private landowners that now have an interest in coming forward with their sale of property, that they would prefer to have that project be considered than perhaps one they had previously. To quote them in their words, we think it just provides a much higher payback and higher likelihood that we can be successful as a result. Bingo. To me, that's the kind of process changes and the kind of way in which this program has really worked to, I won't use the word perfection, but it's been pretty close. The legislature and the cabinet work very closely together in terms of the pilot programs, and we've provided to you all a list of those particular sites, how the funding was used, where they were, and the project investment and amount that was both approved but then actually has been or will be dispersed depending upon where we are on that process and whether the timetables are relative for them to complete these projects. But I just want to go back to a couple of successes. Without the pilot project, we would not have had Pratt Paper. And that's 321 jobs that I think, with a $400 million investment, speaks volumes to how powerful this program can be. Latte Aluminum, which is going to be a supplier in the EV side of things and brings some very unique expertise in using aluminum in terms of how you put that into the EV process, would not have been here without the pilot project. And both Tyson and Envision are actually beneficiaries of activities that took place with the pilot program. And so again, we're seeing great results. A project in Fayette County with the Equine Analytical, which I toured their facility, great opportunity, great fit for Lexington. And also the project down in Graves County. And I just want to stop on this one. Not only was that, I think, a good result of the pilot program, I think it was also a good result of the state and everyone working together where, just as we are in eastern Kentucky, where there have been disasters that have struck, you can still find companies that can see the vision of the opportunity. And to have a company that's female-owned, family-owned business that makes the kind of equipment you use in agricultural industries and others, to put that operation there in Graves County, I think is a great, great sign of the kind of collaborative work that's taking place. Total pilot successes to date, there were 20 approved, an investment of about $36 million, and 3,500 jobs, and 10 projects, and there's a lot of zeros in a $4 billion total project investment, but that's the outcome of the pilot. And we made a commitment to you as a legislature that of the $100 million, we would hold that same standard as we had in the pilot. Let's go find the kind of projects that will yield a true measurable rate of return, but adjusted to reflect the unique elements of that community. Again, 10, 15 jobs in one part of the state is just as important as 500 in the other, and we've built that into the evaluation process. My last slide is, for me at least, an important one. Spirit of winning with integrity is one of our core values at the Cabinet. We all embrace that. You've heard me speak many times in all the ad district meetings that I have been to, which I'm proud to say I've done. I point out, Kentucky is a winner. Kentucky is a very special state with very special people, and we don't need to apologize for anything. And that's the spirit of winning with integrity. Also, it's a spirit of winning with humility that I think we very much embrace, and we very much should continue to embrace as a state, because it is a competition. I wish I could say that we all get a vote in terms of where a site is going to go. My humble experience is that lots of people are involved, but ultimately there's one vote. It's usually the owner or the CEO. And therefore, you've got to really make sure that you're fully competitive. And I would rather have a community here, you almost got there, and let's go roll up our sleeves together to get you there in the round two, because that's going to make you more competitive than somehow just approving a project that wasn't fully yet ready to go. And our personal commitments as the team all up here is we're personally involved in that process to make sure communities come better, because McKinsey, which is an economic development major consulting firm, points out tax incentives are important in location decisions, but really, truly, at the end, it's that totality that goes into whether or not a community is going to win an existing business expansion or a new company. And that's everything from workforce and training, the infrastructure investments. If you've got utility issues, not only when can they be implemented, but when would they be completed? I like to put this analogy on it in terms of what we did at Whirlpool. Community, commit to us when this piece of ground and when we can have a certificate of occupancy for when we can actually become operational. That's all we care about. When can we be operational? And if you don't have all that information, you're not competitive. And I really do believe this is a program that embraces that spirit of winning with integrity, and more importantly, as that one local economic developer, I think, shared, this is a program that's making them better and stronger, and that's the attitude by which we roll up into this presentation today and are already preparing for the round two. Further, I would say, and I shared it here last week, we're actively out in the state. We're actively working with communities. Our project managers are already working with every local community to say, let's get ready for round two. And I was on a call today with a private property owner that the local community is trying to work with, because we want to find other sites that maybe weren't ready for. And as I heard in Eastern Kentucky last week, there were 3 sites that they just didn't have everything ready, and they didn't want to present their application until they really were ready. That's the spirit of which we are, again, rolling up into the next round. And you just can't say it enough, Mr. Chairman. We don't make laws, we don't pass bills, we don't really control what happens in local communities, but our job is to be that collaborator And I want to express sincere appreciation for this legislative body, the full legislature, the governor's office, all of the state agencies. You know, it really does take a full team effort to win these projects. And I did some of this kind of work in Michigan for a long time. For Whirlpool, I did it in different parts of the world, and it's not just smoke, it's really true. There is a spirit of collaboration and cooperation that just comes through in Kentucky. And it's really, truly, I think, the competitive advantage we have. And from my neck of the woods, I believe that if you have a competitive advantage, just call it out. It's part of what makes us special, and we need to be willing to say that, and I do really, truly believe that is a unique thing that we have, is this willingness to collaborate and cooperate when it comes to creating jobs for all Kentuckians and not a few.
Thank you, Secretary Noel. I got just a couple questions, and then we'll, if Representative Hart and all have questions, we'll get to them. But how many different counties across the state applied for the money? Do you have any idea how many different counties or groups?
We had 70 applications, and we had about 8 or 9 regional applications. So I'll give you a refined number within a day if we can go back and kind of calculate it that way, and we'll be happy to do that.
It was very close to 86.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
And then,
But we need more, and that's one of the reasons we're out there working.
And then on the regional approach, does that work better for a regional approach rather than just a single county? Or I guess the regional approach is probably for smaller counties that are gathered together rather than a big county like Jefferson County. My question is, does regional approaches, does that work better than just a single county?
I think it's really, go ahead.
I would like to let Beth Land respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my experience, yes, especially for, like you said, the more rural areas that are able to aggregate. If you think about the recruitment process for a corporate project, you're aggregating a regional workforce, you're aggregating regional, community technical college resources. There's a lot that goes into that regional approach. And so rather than a region putting a lot of eggs in different baskets, for them to come together and say, we've probably really got one shot at this. Let's all work together to put our best foot forward. And we've kind of over the years seen this in action. People coming in with more than one application in separate counties, and then them coming back later and saying, you know what, it would be much better if we came up with a partnership agreement where we can share the success and also share in the responsibility for supporting these types of projects. So in my experience, both in Kentucky and across the entire country, yes, a regional approach is definitely a great option.
And I would emphasize, I don't think it's delineated between small, rural, or whatnot. I actually look at big urban areas. There's some urban areas that don't have access to land that could be out there for manufacturing development. I would welcome a big urban area that's partnered with surrounding more rural areas to identify where there could be a piece of ground that would be perfect for a major industrial user, and they're coming in together. I also have a very practical view on this. Under the statutes in this round, $2 million is the limit per applicant or per county. But if you come in together, you can multiply that many times over, which creates more of a mega site opportunity. And so we don't say that you need to do regional collaborations or that sort of thing, because I think any partnership is up to those that want to enter into it and that they define what those shared responsibilities are. But the practicality is you can access a lot of money in a regional approach, or you may have some strengths in your community, such as workforce and others perhaps, but you don't have the land, so you can partner with the surrounding community. Or there may be a situation where some communities have what I call clusters of certain industries, that having an additional piece of ground in a regional approach would help attract other kinds of companies in that cluster, because a lot of industries like to be in an area in which similar industries are located there, simply because of the training of the workforce and the R&D things that occur.
I believe that in East Kentucky, the last few years, a lot of the county judges are pulling together, where it used to be our county, my county, now it's our region. And I'm glad to see that happen back home. And so the industrial board or the industrial site, would they carry the water, so to speak, like the board? If there's a 5-county board, then that board would carry the water as far as putting in the application and doing all that.
Yes, I mean, you got to have the structure. So Structurally, typically, is a good industrial authority, which then meets the public criteria.
Right.
But then the members that serve in it would all roll up their sleeves and be part of that application, but the lead would be that structure. And to echo what you said, as you know, I was in Eastern Kentucky last week and met with multiple judges from multiple communities talking about specifically what can they do together. And so we're seeing that. I'm seeing that all across the state, and I think it's fantastic.
That's good. Any other questions?
Just a brief comment. I just want to thank you for your efforts of trying to push this out. The state's had some successes here in the last several years, and your all's efforts don't go unnoticed. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
But we're still not satisfied. We can do better. We can also do better in making sure we're communicating more or bringing ideas like we had today with talking to a private property owner. So webinars, calls, meetings, and the way we put this structure together in terms of the communications with all the communities. A project manager on our team working directly with Haley's organization and with BETH. It's great to have multiple folks involved in organizations because it speeds up the communications. It actually also creates a relationship that allows us to do more creative things when you get in that room with them together. So, Representative Hart, we appreciate that, but we also know we can do better and we will do better. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'll say just one quick thing, Chairman. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your presentation. Banking and insurance back and forth, is what it is. I do want to say one thing on the regional approach, and Andy with GLI or with Lexington Chamber of Commerce, we talked about this earlier in the session. It's critical, Mr. Chairman, that we all look at a regional approach because most businesses, they don't look at county lines. And I had the fortunate opportunity to work with Mayor Abramson when he was lieutenant governor. He's still mayor for life. And he told me a long time ago in Louisville with their GLI, they opened up a regional partnership there, and they actually included counties in Indiana. And they did that because they had more land accessible across the river than they did in Jefferson County. And the comment or the lesson that they learned with that, it was much more important for that business to locate within that region than go to Nashville or to Indianapolis. And that's the same approach we've got to get here. It's more important to get that company to be in our neighbor's backyard because people drive and commute from county to county for their jobs and work. So I really appreciate your focus there and a regional approach and the collaboration because that's how we're going to compete collectively as a state against some of these other areas. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I would echo that. Thank you for all the work that you do across all of Kentucky. And it's a fact that together we'll make Kentucky better. And we can't ever get satisfied, right? We got to keep working hard. All right. Thank you. Any other business that we've got? All right. Thank you all for presenting today. Yeah, I didn't even check and watch to see if it run.
Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman. We appreciate it.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
And we are adjourned.